Fine. Hoping we're live. That's all, everything working. Welcome to this week's episode, and to Vicky. I think we are live, going live on all of the systems. Welcome to those watching live on LinkedIn. We're also live on Instagram and YouTube. This is part of the How Change Changes You podcast and conversations that I'm having. And really, it's just to remind everybody that we're in constant flux of change. It never ends, fortunately or unfortunately. And so today I'm really excited to be speaking to the wonderful Vicky Brockley. And Vicky, I'll get you to introduce yourself, and you're going to share your change story today. As usual with all of these conversations, it really is about talking about the human experience of change, that we all go through these particular stages that are challenging to us. So really hoping for anyone who's listening who resonates with the story that Vicky's going to share. The aim here is to inspire you to look at things maybe a little differently, to lean into some of the challenges you're facing. And we're going to talk about, obviously how Vicky's navigated those, and how you might be able to do that too. So without further ado, Vicky, would you like to introduce yourself to the beautiful people watching?
Thank you. So I'm Vicky Brockley. I'm a leadership coach. I spend my time turning around underperforming businesses, either from a financial or a cultural perspective, and often the two are linked, and also coaching leaders who often find themselves stuck either in a decision, in a business. Where do I go next? What do I do next? I'm just generally stuck. So that's kind of what I spend my time doing now, and they're the two main strands to my business.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Vicky. And so when we connected to talk about your change story, what kind of made you choose the story that you're going to share specifically? Right? Why did this rise to the top for you?
Well, I think to me, and I'm going to apologize up front, because even though it was 11 years ago, I can still get emotion come up with it.
Oh, of course. Of course.
But the thing that made me choose this is that genuinely, as you said, Christina, we go through change all of the time. Mm-hmm. But I've never had such an impactful change in my life in terms of both speed of it, impact of it, emotion around it, and just, I guess, changing my trajectory going forward. So the reason why I chose that is just, it's always the thing that sticks out as quite a defining moment.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's really important to highlight that it may well have been 11 years ago, but because it's been so impactful, and obviously it is about the loss of your parents, which I can certainly resonate with personally. Yeah. Time is just not a factor. And I think for anyone listening, I think we all need to give ourselves compassion for things that have been gargantuan in our lives. Yeah. And even no matter how many years pass, it's still emotional. It's still there. I'm really honoured that you're going to go there anyway. And I think it's important to show the emotion, because we're emotional beings, right? And just to say on that one, Christina, I absolutely appreciate that there's so many people lost their parents, so there might be people sitting going, well, yeah, I've lost mine, and I've lost mine, and it happens. And I'm not saying for one second that it happened to me more than it did to my siblings. We all went through it. Mm-hmm. I think it happened in such a short space of time for me. So within 8 weeks, it happened. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't decry anybody else's. I think this is just my story and my experience, and
Absolutely.
I appreciate everybody else's will be different.
Of course, and I think that is important to highlight, because everybody's story is relative and relevant, because it's all the relationship we have with our parents is all different too. Some are super close, some are not close at all, and that brings up a lot of complexity. So I think it's important to raise that too, for sure. So do you want to take us back to a little bit of context as to kind of where you were at just maybe before a lot of this change happened for you?
Mm-hmm. So from a relatively early, probably like the 40s, my mum hadn't been in the best of health. And just again, to put it into context, so I'm not a parent. And I found that the older my parents got, the more I found myself parenting them. Because I wasn't, as much as my time was taken up with work, it wasn't taken up with looking after children and all of that kind of thing. So my mum wasn't always in the best of health. And in later years, my dad, we thought initially he was just suffering from depression, but it ended up he had dementia. And I guess that in itself had created a very, very difficult home environment for my mum, coping, not only with her own health challenges, but with my dad and his dementia and the moods that brought, the difficulties that brought, the depression, the anger, every single thing that brought. So I used to, even though at the time I had a full-on job, I had a job at the time where I was looking after the whole of the UK, so I was traveling a lot. But I would always spend as much time as I possibly could with them. My husband was great in supporting and doing the same, but sometimes I'd turn up and my mum would just say, can you just take him out? Can you just take him away? And that, I wanted to see her as well, but to give to her was actually by taking him away.
Yes.
So I'd put him in the car and we'd just drive around for hours just to give her a break.
Right.
So that was kind of the ongoing scenario that we had. Anyway, my mum was in and out of hospital lots, and that led to a huge amount of confusion for my dad. So I know I'd be at work and my phone would ring incessantly, and it would be my dad saying, "Where's your mum? Where's your mum?" And I'd put the phone down, I'd say, "She's in hospital, I'll be over after work and I'll take you to see her." Would ring like a minute later, "Where's your mum? Where's your mum?" And I could not answer that phone. I could not answer it. And sometimes I would say to people at work, "I'm really sorry, I just have to go." And I'd get there and he'd say, "Oh, what are you doing here?" Because he couldn't remember he'd been ringing me, 17, 18 times in, an hour.
Yes.
And she wasn't there. And so it put a huge amount of stress on the family, because often my mum was in hospital, my dad was at home by himself and confused by himself. Although he had carers going in every time that they left, the house, it was then the phone calls started ringing because he didn't know either who was coming into the house or whatever. So it was a constant, even when you are in the moment of trying to concentrate on work, I would never have my phone on silent. I couldn't have my phone on silent. And I didn't know whether it be the hospital, whether it be carers, whether it be my dad. Just didn't know. So it was an incredibly tiring and stressful time from that emotional drain. And also just from that fear of thinking this is only going to end one way. Like, they are not going to get better. This is only going to end one way. And actually the feeling, and funnily enough, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who was saying exactly the same thing to me. Oh my God, I don't know what I would ever do if anything happened to my mum and dad. And I remembered saying exactly that same sentence. I remembered exactly that.
So again, cut a long story short, one time my mum went into hospital and they were like, do you know what? She's not well enough to go home. She needs to go into a care home. So we got her into a care home. My dad was still at home, really not well enough to be at home. And I remember just saying to the care home, because they had a dementia floor, if a bed becomes available, could you let us know? And they rang me this day and said, we've got a bed. And I knew the only reason we had a bed was because somebody had died.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've got to do it now.
Mm.
And it wasn't necessarily a conversation we'd had with my sisters, like, let's do it on this date in this way or whatever.
Mm.
It was just that time that I got that call. I thought, I need to leave work and go and do it now.
Yeah.
And I picked him up from home and I took him to the care home, and he thought he was going to see my mum. And he was. And he never left again. I never took him home again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember he was crying for me not to leave him.
Oh, bless.
And he was saying, take me home, don't leave me. And this went on. I must have been there for 6 hours. And it is the most painful day of my whole life,
Yes.
including the day they died. That day sticks out because he was just like a child. He was crying, he was holding on to me, and he was saying, please don't leave me. And as much as I was saying, my mum's here, you can go and see her when you want, and trying to put a context on it. And in the end, the carers said, just go and leave him. We know how to cope with it.
Yes.
Just go. And he'd lived in his house at that point for like over 40 years.
Long time.
And I just took him out one day and he never, ever went back. And I knew it was the right thing, but it was a painful thing. It was an absolutely painful thing.
Yeah.
And he was in the care home. My mum was on one floor. He was on another floor. That night, I remember I broke my heart, but I think I slept because I knew he wasn't going to leave the house in the middle of the night. He was cared for and so on.
Yeah.
So that was it. They were then in the care home. Every time I went to visit, he asked me to take him out. He asked me to take him home. He'd cry. It was so painful. But it was still the right thing. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And then they'd only been in a couple of months. I'm trying to think exactly. Yeah, I think they'd gone in maybe the November time. My mum died in the 19th of February. So she died in February. My dad died in April. But again, even that, after she died, we were all ready to go to the funeral. And he kept saying, why are we dressed up? Why have we got this? I want to go and see your mum.
Yeah.
And, you know, at first we would say, she's died, Dad. And he'd have tears. And then a moment later he'd say, where's your mum? And we'd say, oh, she's just sleeping. You know, we just did whatever you had to get through it. And do you know what I can honestly say is that from the day that she died, even though he couldn't remember she died, he had this profound sadness. But he didn't know why he had it, but he knew somewhere something had fundamentally changed. And he just stopped eating. He stopped eating from that moment, even though he still asked for her, but he knew he had this sadness that he couldn't connect the two together.
Yeah.
And he just stopped eating. And do you know what? It was the best thing in the world, because when he went, he just wanted to be with her.
Of course.
And so 8 weeks later, it was actually a blessing that they were just back together again. So, so yeah, there's a potted history.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vicky, for sharing something that is deeply personal. But I just feel honoured to hear that story, because so much of it resonates. I mean, dementia wasn't part of my dad's illness, but certainly confusion and delirium played a part. And it is, I remember saying to somebody, no one warns you that you become your parent's parent. Nobody warns you that the parent that part of you still wants to have has gone. And so you're almost grieving the loss of the parent before they've even actually properly left.
Yeah.
So I totally hear you about just trying to do as much as you can for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, even though it's heart-wrenching, even though it upscuttles your life, it comes back down to just doing the right things at the time. It's a leveler, isn't it? I mean, certainly when you're saying about prioritization of like, no, that's not important, this is important.
Yeah. So. It absolutely is. It is a leveler. And I think the other thing that I remember my husband saying, because he'd lost his parents before mine, and him saying, even though he lost his dad relatively young, he said, I wished I'd spent more time. I wished I'd done more. I wished I'd taken him places. I wished I'd done this. And that for me was a massive message. So when my mum and dad died, I never had any of those wishes. I never thought, I wished I'd just taken them on that trip. I wished I'd done that. I wished I'd left work early and gone and had tea with them. I did all of those things, and that massively helped with my grief, because I know often people want somebody back because I wished I'd told them I loved them, or I wished I'd just gone to that place one last time. I didn't have that, and I always thank my husband for giving me that lesson in time to be able to change it and have a different experience.
I mean, it's certainly, you know, I nickname grief as being brutiful, right? Because it's brutal, but it's beautiful. And I think it does teach you, certainly, you know, there's sadness there, but there's also great gratitude of elements of even though, you know, there's a lot of pain there and there's a lot of sorrow. I think what, you know, if you, sounds like you did, and certainly I did, you know, lucky enough to have good relations with your parents.
Absolutely.
It helps with acceptance. It's still hard, isn't it? It is very hard to navigate. But I think if you can know that you can both be sad and grateful at the same time, then it kind of just lessens that ache that you feel. For sure.
It does. And when you see somebody that you love in so much sufferance, you don't want it to continue. No. It's selfish for it to continue because it's continuing for you, not for them.
Exactly.
So yes, you're absolutely right. I was so grateful to have had the parents that I had. I'm so grateful to have the memories, the photos, you know, everything that I've got. And it was the most impactful time of my life, and yet I'm grateful to have had it all.
No, that's a really powerful thing to say. I'm curious, when you talked there as an example, and you, I know, in your career had, you know, a role that was demanding at times. For those that are listening that maybe are looking after an elderly parent or an ill loved one right now, and they're trying to balance a busy, demanding job with caring for a loved one, what advice would you give?
I think mine was always about honesty, because sometimes I think, you know, as leaders, we can say, oh, well, I'm the leader, you know, I'm supposed to be everything to everybody, but I've got nothing going on. And people often see that as a weakness, you know, leave your troubles at the door and you come in and you get on with your job. And I would never encourage that in one of my team. And certainly it was never the way that I behaved. So it was something that I was open and honest about, because I think I would give that to others as well. It wasn't like, oh, please make sure I'm okay, but can you get on with your job? So I think it's about being open and honest and actually being vulnerable in those moments, because sometimes actually the emotion does hit you, or I'm sorry, I need to leave this meeting, or I'm sorry, I'll try and come here, but I need to have my phone on, or whatever it may be. So what I would say is be open with who you need to be open with, whether that is your peer group, whether, you know, it's your management team, whether it's your boss, whoever it is, tell them what it is that's going on. But then I think from a personal point of view, try and remember that message that my husband taught me, which is, you know, oh, but I have to be away with work. I have to do this. I have to do. You don't have to. You don't have to do anything. You might be choosing to. Sometimes it might be difficult to get out of meetings. Sometimes, you know, there might be the odd one that you do. But actually, that time will not be there forever. And I know so many people who have prioritized what they see in hindsight as the wrong things. And then the grief hits them so much harder because it's I wish they were back here so I could X, Y, and Z. So my advice is be honest, but be really, really critical about what you prioritize, but also be careful about looking after you as well, because it is absolutely draining. I completely get that. And none of us are machines. And sometimes when you are trying to be the best you can at work and then trying to be the carer and the cleaner and the, you know, on the phone to the hospital, the doctors, the whoever it might be, you also have to prioritize yourself. So I think you just have to be really good at tuning in. And if you aren't really good at tuning in yourself, you need to find the person that you can trust who says, have a day off, let me go and see them, or let me go and do that, or whatever. So look for those people around you who can support you as well.
Yeah, I think that is such an important message to share from a personal and professional standpoint, because I think when we push ourselves too hard, so part of why I have this mission to eradicate professional female burnout is because I burnt out after my mum passed away with brain cancer, because I was trying to balance a busy role with zipping up and down the motorway to see her, and I just pushed myself far too hard. And after she passed, I fell into a deep dark hole for a long time. And I think it's so important what you share, Vicky, about, you know, especially from an employer's, if there are any, you know, leaders, managers, colleagues out there that is maybe having somebody in your team that is navigating this kind of challenge, to be open and ask for the honesty and encourage the honesty, and don't, whatever you do, put extra pressure on, because it's really not helpful.
No, absolutely not. And don't let them, it's funny, I was with a client last week who was going through a similar thing, and the emotion really struck him. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry, just move on. And I said, no, we won't move on. Like, just sit with it. So I think you're right. It might not always be your immediate boss. It might not be the person who sits next to you or whatever, but there will be somebody, and hunt them out. Find them.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. And, you know, I suppose it's a very human thing. I tend to think about it as being a very British thing, specifically, of apologising for feeling emotion. And I think especially in workplaces that maybe don't have that culture and see emotions as being weak, there is real danger, isn't there, of bottling that emotion up and suppressing it. It does so much more damage than just letting it out. And I think, thank goodness, we are moving and evolving into workplaces and societally where we welcome more of that emotion and expression of emotion. So no, that's great. So in terms of then when you saw that, you obviously went through such a grueling time, such an emotional time, can you talk about then how that impacted then returning to work, and then how you then saw life after you went through all of that?
So I have to say my employer was brilliant at the time. Great. So, you know, I was lucky in that way that, you know, they were like, take the time, do what you need to do, and so on. And when I went back to work, if I'm totally honest, the things that people get wound up about, stressed about, or whatever, I felt myself in my head going like, really? Like, oh, for God's sake. So at the time I was working in distribution, just to give you a very real example. And if something didn't turn up, you'd quite often get, you know, one of the store managers ringing you to say like, my pallet of beans didn't turn up, or this didn't, or whatever. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake. So somebody didn't have the beans for tea. Is that important?
Yeah.
And I had to keep a real check on myself for feeling like that, like, oh, for goodness sake, get a perspective, like really get a perspective. And I just, after a few weeks, I just thought, do you know what? I just need a break. I need a break. I need to draw a line under it, reset and come back. So because I have a wonderful husband, I said to him, what if I left work and you left work and we out and did something? And as it happened, work where I was at were having a restructure, and they'd offered me this bigger role. And I took the opportunity to say, actually, do you know what? I'm going to take a break. So thank you, but I'm leaving. He asked work for a career break, and they thought he'd just, you know, they said no, and they thought he would just get on with it. And he said, okay, I'm resigning. And they were like, what? He said, I'm resigning. So he just resigned, because we were like, do you know what? We'll be fine. We'll work something out. We both are good at what we do, and we'll come back and we'll get a job as soon as we come back, and it'll be fine. So we actually went traveling. We got a camper van and went traveling around the US for quite a while, which I found quite cathartic, because I really like writing. So as we were traveling, I was doing a bit of a blog about where we were, the funny things that had happened, but also reflections of my mum and dad and memories and how I was feeling and all of this kind of thing. So I really found it quite cathartic. But I felt as if when we'd done all of that traveling, I felt this, you mentioned it earlier, this real gratitude that in some ways, because I had had the parents that I'd had, I felt I needed to give something back. So we decided, after we'd had a bit just downtime, we were going to go and work in Sri Lanka. And we ended up working in a Buddhist temple school. So my husband was renovating the temple, and I was teaching the monks English, even though I'm not an English teacher, but hey-ho. And then on an afternoon, we'd go to an orphanage that had been set up after the tsunami. So we went there. We did it like real backpackers. So even though at the time I was mid-40s, my husband was mid-50s, we did it with Plan My Gap Year, which was hilarious.
I love it. Proof you can do it whenever you like.
Exactly. So we did it with that. We were living with students, because we were living in this big house with students that had its own stories. I can believe you me.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And we were living in this place where we were the only white people there. We'd walk down the street and people would want to touch you just because, oh my God. And people had nothing, and yet they had everything in terms of warmth and kindness, and karma was exactly what they had. And it really took us a while to settle in. We were laughing because, like, after the first 2 days, we were like, should we go home but not tell anybody that we've gone home? And we were like, right, let's just give it one more day. Because, you know, we'd get a shower and there was no, like, it was just cold water. There were ants everywhere. There were geckos running around the rooms. Like, it was just a hovel that we were living in, and we just weren't used to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, as the days went by, we just fell into this simple life of nothing, like no TVs, no like social media, no meetings, well, the only time we would set our thing, because we would get up at 7, the tuk-tuk would come at 7:30 to take us to the temple. We would then have from 12 till 2 off, and we'd go to the beach. And then from 2 till 5, we'd go to the orphanage. And we had this incredibly simple life, but it really exposed us to this culture whereby we'd be on the beach and somebody would come running up with a coconut with the lid chopped off and give us it. And we were like, oh, thank you. And, going in our bags to give them some money. And they were saying, no, no, no. And we were thinking, well, you haven't done it for nothing. And they absolutely had done it for nothing. And they were saying, no, after the tsunami, people of the UK were so kind. This is our payback. And it was like, oh, my God. And once you realize that, it just changed the whole. Nobody was after anything. Nobody was after an extra tip. Nobody was after, I'm doing this because I want something back. It was pure kindness. And it was just the most amazing experience. And I went from teaching these Buddhist monks who ranged from 4 to 14. And I'm sorry if I'm going on, but
no, I love it.
So the way they ended up in the temple was either their parents give them to the temple because they couldn't afford to look after them, or they were born under a certain moon, and therefore, it was written in the stars that they needed to be a monk, or alternatively, from a very, very young age, they had just really expressed an interest in Buddhism and questioning and so on. But to me, they were just little boys, and some of them had the robes on, some of them were yet to be robed, but they were just little boys, and it was honestly, it was heartbreaking, and yet it just filled your soul. It just absolutely filled your soul. So I was doing that while Jared was renovating the temple, and then one of the elders from the temple had said, would you teach us English? Now, these elders had like 4 and 5 degrees, and I'm thinking, what can I teach you? So I said, okay, I'll try. Anyway, the next day, like 14 of them turned up at my class, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But genuinely, it was about conversation and how to improve the grammar in conversation and all of that kind of thing. But in return for that, they would then teach me how to meditate. So that was kind of the payback, that you kind of just teach us for nothing. We have to give something back. And honestly, it was just the most wonderful, wonderful experience that kind of by the time we were coming back, considering at first we were like, should we go home and lie about it? By the time we were leaving, we just didn't want to leave. And the pair of us, like leaving, it was such an emotional thing to leave. And literally, I remember driving out in the tuk-tuk and all of the boys running after it, crying, and I'm crying. And it was just like, oh my goodness. But it was just the most wonderful, wonderful experience ever. It truly was. But I think it was, again, the absolute perfect thing just to do a reset. Just to do a reset on, we don't need all of these stuff and things. We just need to be kind to each other. We just need to be nice, to help somebody out when you can help them out. And it was just such a cleansing, like a cleansing of the soul. And as I said, that reset, such that by the time I did go back to work, I was missing work. I wanted to go back.
You wanted to go back.
I wanted to take that on again. So So yeah, that was what.
Oh, I love that so much. I didn't know we had Sri Lanka in common, because at the beginning of my travels, I also taught some Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
What part of Sri Lanka were you in?
Ambalangoda.
Ambalangoda, right. That was because I was in Koskoda, which is just up the coast.
Yeah.
So it was kind of on the
And did you have a
east.
similar kind of experience?
Oh, I just absolutely loved Sri Lanka. So I was
Yeah.
there volunteering for a sea turtle sanctuary. But we would have loads of school groups through. So we would teach about turtles and look after the turtles. But also in the afternoons, we would go to temple schools and teach English to the kids. So yes, I just you took me back to just this lovely place that I will always hold dear to my heart, because one thing I did notice, both in Sri Lanka and India, I experienced the most kindness, the most human. In fact, it was probably those two countries that reinstilled my faith in human nature.
Yeah.
Which is just incredible. And I think that's the gift of travel, right? It's one of the many gifts of travel. It just proves that actually you go from, busy working in corporate, and like you say, like people are ringing up, like getting all tight about things that have gone wrong, and it's just the absolute kind of opposite to that, and contrast.
And even just the children, I have never seen children play so long with a stone on a piece of dirt. Either playing hopscotch or chasing each other or doing whatever. And I remember when we were leaving, we bought them some simple, plastic cricket balls and bats. And it was like, oh my God. And in no time, I kid you not, they were in the corner because they were quite happy playing in the trees and doing whatever. And you come back, and I know it's just society, but you come back and you look at what people have here and you're like, oh my goodness, everybody needs to go and just see what true happiness is, and just being in the moment is.
Oh, yes. Without a doubt. No, it's thank you for taking me back down memory lane in Sri Lanka, because it's a beautiful place to be.
It is.
When you think then about all of that, and obviously within all of these conversations, I like to ask people the same kind of questions. When you reflect upon going through that with your parents, how you navigated work, and then the choice to give yourself the grace and space to kind of reset, what did you learn about yourself during all of this change?
I think I learned about myself. I was more resilient than I thought I was. So as much as I've always been quite tough, and I don't mean tough in a hard way. I mean quite strong. I'm quite, I've got a strong mind and whatever. But I think going back to that whole fear of, oh my God, I couldn't survive if my mum and dad weren't here. Mm-hmm. Of course I can, and I did, and other people can and will.
Yes.
You don't want to wish it on anybody, but it'll come to all of us. So I think I realized that I had a resilience that I didn't know that I had. And equally, to go and have some of the experiences I had with traveling, I had a resilience to overcome things. I'm not a creepy crawly type person, but once it's not going to eat me, I'm fine. So I think resilience in that as well. So I think it learned me that. It taught me that. I think it also reinforced to me what is important. So just because my mum and dad, are no longer here, I still have people, my family and friends that I love dearly. And actually that's what's important to me. So it's just that baton's been passed. So again, that is something that continues to bring me my perspective that, whatever's going on, I feel that I'll be okay so long as everybody in my inner sanctum is okay. So I think it gave me that continued perspective as well. And the other thing that it also gave me was this thing of life's too short to be doing what you don't enjoy.
Oh, God, yeah.
Now, I know I've always been the type of person who I've kind of always said I'm not really ambitious, but I've just ended up doing a good job wherever I've been, and I've got recognized for that. But equally, if I have ever been in a role where I think I'm not enjoying this anymore, I don't sit around. I'm like, I need to leave. I might not know what I'm going to do, but I know I need to leave and go and do something else. And I think it reinforced that. It reinforced the fact that actually, do you know what? That's a good thing to still sit within me, that I need to hold on to that. And I'm very good at recognizing it, and I'm very good at actioning it. And I encourage other people to do the same, because nobody knows what's around the corner. You know, we all think we all saving for the day that we retire and then we'll have another however many years. You hear so many tales where none of that happens.
Nothing's guaranteed, is it?
Nothing. So again, I think it's just that piece of when you're not happy, it's within your gift to do something about it and change it. So do it.
Absolutely.
You know, don't sit around complaining and blaming. Go and do something.
Yeah, it is. It's a reminder, isn't it? Powerful reminder to say, you know, maybe I'm just planted in the wrong place. Maybe this is just my skills and my knowledge, you know, it's ready. It's time to be planting elsewhere, or to go and have a different experience. And I think sometimes we can get, I don't know, I guess institutionalized, or start to think, oh, well, it's about me if I can't do this. You know, I mean, we're seeing it more and more, isn't it, of people moving and changing and not having rules for life. And certainly that's the
But equally, I come across so many people as well who live for the weekend. They hate work every day. You know, on a night they'll have a glass of wine or they'll have whatever because, oh my God, work's over. They live for the weekend, and Sunday night is the dread for Monday morning again, thinking, oh, well, when I'm 65 or however old, then I'll start living. And it's like, oh my God, wake up.
Yeah, it is wake up, isn't it? It's live while you're alive, essentially, because to your point, if you're just going through the motions, then you know, are you being your best self, and are you giving your best to others? Chances are not. It's scary territory, but it's, I think, once you make that change, then you experience something that's worth taking a risk.
And you know what? I know you do amazing work with energy and shifting energy and moving energy, but when you find yourself in the right place, you are so much more energized anyway.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
You know, that's 100%. The thing. That's the irony, that actually it's within you. It's just, as you say, sitting in the wrong place.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It is. It's, I think sometimes that part of that tapping into your zone of genius is thinking about, what environment do I need to be around? You know, who's going to kind of, you know, be that sounding board, or that environment where that makes me feel like I come alive. And I truly believe there is somewhere like that for everyone. It's just sometimes like Goldilocks, we've got to try a few different ones before we find the right one.
And let go of the fear to try them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you're in a terrible job and you end up in another terrible job, well, okay, you're no worse off.
No, exactly. And chances are you have new experiences. And back to what you just mentioned earlier, which is about resilience. We can't ever gain resilience unless we go through these challenges and different experiences, because we don't learn anything about ourselves. If we're staying put because it's safe and known, we don't learn. We start to stagnate, and that's often what we see, isn't it, as to why people go through those motions. So just to kind of bring us full circle, how does this learning that you've had about yourself, about the resilience, about the prioritization, the not sweating the small stuff, and actually kind of, you know, really seeing life as an adventure and living it full? Like, you know, I have a friend that said to me recently, I want to live the depth and breadth of life, you know, not just like this middle area. It's like, I want to experience it all. How has that then influenced how you show up in your life today and the work that you do as a consultant with leaders?
Yeah. So I think it got to a point, going back to that place of, if I'm not enjoying it, I move on. So I did go back to the corporate world. I did go on to turn around many underperforming businesses, which I love doing. You end up getting promoted and promoted and promoted, and it takes you away from what you love doing. So on that theme of we don't live forever, and I don't want to be getting up every day and doing something that I don't enjoy, I thought, right, not happy, I need to leave. And again, my husband was like, oh, what are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know, but it'll come to me. And so he just knows me now, but that genuinely was the thing. I don't know, but I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this, and I'll leave. And I thought, right, what do I love doing? And I thought, I love turning around underperforming businesses, and I love coaching people. I love when you have a conversation and somebody has a light bulb moment, and you know in that moment that has changed how they are going to be going forward. I just love that. So I thought, right, what if I start my own business? And again, I was very much of, I never really thought it was me. But I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I started, it fails, I can go back and get a job. You know, I had no question that I could go back and get a job. So the only thing that was going to stop me was fear. So kind of that was what I did. I just left. I got to the start line in terms of setting up the company, setting up the website, doing this, and then thinking, just go for it. And I emailed all of my contacts, and literally within days, somebody came back and said, can you come and do some work for me? And then somebody else did, and somebody else did. And it's just snowballed from there. And I think some of that is because I know, not in a big-headed way, but I know what I'm good at.
Yeah.
And the people that I've worked with know that I'm really good at that. So therefore, so long as I stick in my lane, then people will come to me. People will say when they have that problem, Vicky, can you go and have a look at that? Vicky, can you go and sort that? And I think that's the thing. It's about knowing yourself enough to know, actually, when I am absolutely at my best and in my flow, this is what I'm doing. I'm in a business that's struggling. I can see lots of complex problems. I can see lots of cultural divides and toxicity and a whole host of things. I can see all of that. And yet somehow I can very quickly piece it together as to what needs to happen in order to move that forward. And when I'm in that state is when, for me, my energy levels are at the highest. And it just is. It's something that I appreciate when I'm going in there. The people in there are struggling, but it's something that I find quite easy because I've done it so many times and I know what kind of things I'm going to come across. But equally, I think because I'm bringing a different level of energy to typically the people who are weighed down with that problem, I think I can just fill them up enough to get them to move, to get them to take the actions that they need to take. So I think that's how I show up in my workspace. But equally, because I am not now bogged down in any of the stuff that I didn't like about my corporate world, i.e. the politics and the traveling where I don't want to travel and the being on a call at 7 o'clock at night or whatever, or the socializing with people I don't want to socialize with. And all of that stuff I've cleansed out of my life, because now it's my choice what work I say yes to, what I say no to, how I choose to spend my time. So I find from that I have the best work-life balance ever, because I prioritize my health and my fitness and walks and time with my husband and adventures away, and we've just bought a camper van and just things that working for me as a corporate 9 to 5, there might have been 20% of the stuff that I love doing and 80% that came with the job. Whereas now in my work, 100% of it is what I want to be doing and what makes me feel alive. And that for me determines the energy with which I turn up with.
I love it. I love it, Vicky. I mean, it radiates out of you. It radiates out of you. And I know when we talk in person, equally it does. And I think that is pretty much a perfect definition of playing in your zone of genius. Yeah. Because if you can kind of, you know, work out what really lights you up and drives you and where your skill set is and what gets you up in the morning and where you can make a difference. It's kind of that alignment, isn't it, between your skill set, your values, and what's really important to you. And it just sounds like we've just found this perfect place. Sweet. Exactly. Oh, well, fantastic. So if anybody listening kind of goes, oh, I have a business that's struggling, I have a cultural problem, I have stuff that's not working, where can people come and find you and contact you?
Yeah, probably the best place is LinkedIn. So Vicky Brockley Consulting. So that would be the best place. And I would hope that people see, because I think you and I fall into this same category, that often I think people think consultant and they have this suit and how somebody's going to turn up. And I don't think that's how either of us turn up. So what I would say is actually, I'm pretty normal, as I hope people could tell from this conversation. And that generally is how I turn up in the workplace, which I think also gives people a level of comfort and ease that they might not have had, particularly in a difficult time. So that would be the best place to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, we'll make sure that all of your links are below on the various platforms. So if people are interested in coming to speak with you, then they can. I just want to finally say again, Vicky, thank you so much for sharing your change story and for really, you know, sharing those powerful reflections. If anyone listening has taken anything away from what we've shared, it sparked anything in them, we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to know. If you're also watching this and think, oh my God, my friend would love this, my partner would, my colleague would, then please share it. You know, the message we want to get out here is that you are capable, you are wildly capable of going through change and coming out the other side, and to take the dark times and the light times to just create a beautiful life that has everything in it. So thank you again, Vicky. Love the conversation.
Thank you, Christine. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'll just end the live. You stay there though.